Caroline stood by the window of her cozy kitchen, thoughtfully gazing at the sunset. The light scent of freshly baked buns lingered in the air, filling the house with warmth and peace. Soup simmered quietly on the stove, while children's laughter echoed from the living room. Everything was going as usual, perfectly, almost like in the fairy tales she once told her daughter at bedtime. The house where they lived was their pride. Spacious, bright, with large windows and cozy rooms, it was the embodiment of their dream of a happy life. Photographs from their travels hung on the walls. Mountains, sea, carefree smiles. It all seemed so real and eternal. "Mom, can I take the last cookie?" shouted Emily, peeking into the kitchen. "Emily, leave at least one for Lucas," Caroline replied with a smile, taking off her apron. Lucas, noticing his share was in danger, rushed into the kitchen, hiding his little hands behind his back. "It's mine," he laughed, trying to reach for the plate, but his sister dodged skillfully. "Enough, kids," intervened Caroline, separating them. "It's time for dinner." Evenings in their family were always special. They gathered around a large wooden table, shared stories about their day, and dreamed about the future. David came home from work exactly at 7. His confident steps and the faint scent of expensive cologne were the unchanging signal for the start of family dinner. Today, as always, he walked into the house with a bouquet of roses in his hands. "For the best hostess," he said, handing the flowers to his wife. Caroline blushed slightly, accepting the gift. "Thank you, David. You've outdone yourself again." "No such thing as overdone," he said with a light smile. "My Caroline deserves only the best." The children were used to moments like these and paid no attention to the flowers. For them, it was just part of the family ritual. The evening went on as usual, cozy, familiar, and warm. Caroline listened as David talked about work, Emily shared her school achievements, and Lucas proudly announced that he had learned to count to 100. Could there be anything better? Caroline thought, glancing at her loved ones. After dinner, David went upstairs to finish some urgent work. Caroline cleared the table, enjoying the calm that always followed family conversations. Everything in her life seemed flawless. Each day was like the one before, filled with caring for the children, small joys, and the certainty of a reliable tomorrow. But deep inside, something troubled her. That barely noticeable coldness in her husband's words, his rare late nights at work, and the strange phone calls in the evenings. She brushed those thoughts away, convincing herself it was just tiredness or work problems. Caroline dried her hands with a towel, glanced once more at the children watching a movie in the living room, and went upstairs. In the bedroom, David was already asleep, slightly turned to his side. His breathing was steady and calm. Caroline sat quietly on the edge of the bed and ran her hand through his hair. It all seemed too perfect to be true. "Everything is fine," she whispered to herself, closing her eyes. But her heart, as always, knew the truth long before her mind was ready to accept it. The day was sunny, but inside Caroline everything felt as if it were wrapped in thick fog. She decided to sort through old documents in the study, a usual task she had been putting off for months. Boxes with receipts, contracts, and bank statements had gathered dust in the corner, reminding her of the long-overdue cleanup. "Time to get it over with," she sighed, sitting down on the floor. While going through the papers, Caroline came across David's phone. As always, he had left it on the desk, forgetting to take it with him. The screen lit up, and a name caught her eye. Victoria. "Who's Victoria?" Caroline muttered, instinctively opening the conversation. At first, she couldn't believe her eyes. The messages were filled with warm words, confessions, and plans for the future. "My Victoria, soon everything will be different. We'll be together, just as we dreamed. I can't wait to leave this boring little town. New York, that's where real life is." Every word cut deep. Caroline's head spun. She closed the phone and tried to take a deep breath, but the air seemed stuck in her throat. In that moment, her entire existence split into two parts, before and after. "It can't be," she whispered, feeling the ground slipping from beneath her feet. She sat in silence for a long time, trying to piece together her shattered thoughts. How long had this been going on? Why hadn't she noticed anything? Or had she simply refused to see it? When David came home, Caroline was already sitting in the kitchen with his phone in her hand. He understood everything at first glance. "We need to talk," she said coldly, trying to remain calm. David froze for a second, then sat down across from her. "Caroline, I didn't want you to find out like this. But yes, there is another woman. This was bound to happen. I'm tired of this life." Caroline remained silent, studying the face of the man she had once loved more than anything in the world. She searched for even a drop of regret or remorse, but found nothing but cold determination. "Are you leaving?" she finally asked. "Yes. Victoria offered me a job in New York, and I can't miss this opportunity. It's a new level, Caroline. You have to understand." "Understand?" Caroline barely restrained herself from screaming. At that moment, flashes of their life together passed before her eyes. The birth of their children, Lucas's first steps, Emily's school performances, sleepless nights, and joyful holidays. All of it now meant nothing to David. "And how do you imagine this?" Her voice trembled. "You'll just leave me here with the kids and the debts?" "I'm sure you'll manage. You've always been strong," he replied, getting up from the table. "I'll leave some money to get you started. After that, I know you'll find a way." The next day he left. No fights, no long explanations. He just packed his things and disappeared. Caroline was left alone in the empty house with the children, who didn't yet know that their world had just collapsed. Lucas ran up to her, hugging her waist. "Mom, when is Dad coming back?" He'll be away for a while, sweetheart," she whispered, stroking his head, feeling her heart break into pieces. Emily stood in the doorway, watching her mother closely. She already understood far more than she should have at her age. "He's not coming back, is he?" Caroline forced a smile. "We'll be okay, Emily, I promise." But later that night, alone in the empty house, she cried for the first time in years. The cry was quiet, muffled, almost soundless, yet it filled the entire space around her. The world she had so carefully built had crumbled into dust. After David left, Caroline's life turned into an endless series of problems. Everything that once seemed so strong and stable was collapsing beneath her feet. The mornings started with anxiety, and the nights brought insomnia and heavy thoughts. The first blow came from a financial catastrophe. Up until now, all expenses, mortgage, bills, Emily's tuition at a private school, had been covered by David's salary. Now that responsibility fell on Caroline's shoulders, and she immediately realized she couldn't manage. Pay off the mortgage by the end of the month? Impossible. Pay Emily's tuition? No funds. Utility bills? They kept piling up. Caroline took on several temporary jobs to keep her family afloat. During the day, she worked at a small local bakery. In the evenings, she cleaned offices. And on weekends, she accepted any odd jobs she could find. Every week, letters reminding her of unpaid debts arrived. Soon, the bank started calling to warn her about mortgage defaults. "We require your immediate payment, or we will have to initiate foreclosure proceedings." Each word echoed in her mind, triggering panic attacks. But the hardest blows fell on her children. Emily felt her father's absence more deeply than she wanted to admit. At first, she simply withdrew into herself, no longer sharing her thoughts. Then problems at school started, skipping classes, declining grades, and strange new friends. Caroline didn't notice right away that her daughter was coming home later and later. "Emily, where were you?" she asked one evening when the clock had already passed midnight. "With friends," Emily replied shortly, avoiding her mother's gaze. "Don't worry." But Caroline knew something was wrong. One day, she received a call from the school informing her that Emily had been caught with a group of friends trying to steal from a local store. Lucas, on the other hand, became increasingly anxious and restless. The boy started getting sick often. Every night, he woke up from nightmares, running into his mother's room and crawling under her blanket, trembling all over. "Mom, I'm scared. Is Dad really coming back?" he whispered. "Everything will be okay, sweetheart," Caroline replied, even though she was barely holding back her tears. Her inner world was falling apart. Sleepless nights, constant tension, and guilt about her children pushed her to the edge of burnout. She felt trapped. Each new day was a battle for survival, But even in this chaos, Caroline didn't lose hope. She desperately tried to support her children, assuring them that everything would get better. She kept telling herself that these were temporary hardships, that she just needed to hold on a little longer, and she would find a way out. But there was no way out, only new blows. One day at the bakery, her boss called her in. "Caroline, you're a wonderful employee, but your frequent absences are affecting the team. I'm sorry, but we can't keep you on any longer." Those words were the final straw. Returning home, she sat on the couch, clutching a letter from the bank she had received that morning. It was a warning about the start of foreclosure proceedings. She was at a dead end. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Standing on the doorstep was her neighbor Anna, her only friend. "Caroline, dear, what happened? You look terrible." Caroline wanted to say that everything was fine, that she was managing, but the words got stuck in her throat. Instead, for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to cry. "I don't know what to do, Anna. I can't take it anymore." Her neighbor hugged her, trying to comfort her. "You're strong, Caroline. You'll find a way out." But Caroline was already doubting that. A few more days like this, and her life would completely fall apart. After being fired, Caroline felt as if she were balancing on the edge of a cliff. Every morning brought a new problem. Her existence now resembled a prolonged fall with no support or salvation. The professional crisis hit without warning. Finding a new job turned out to be much harder than she expected. Constant sick leaves due to Lucas's health, mistakes at her previous workplace, and her drained state made her an unattractive candidate for employers. Every interview ended with a polite rejection. "We'll call you if a suitable position opens up," they said, avoiding eye contact. But no one ever called back. Her debts were growing like a snowball. The bank continued sending notifications about overdue payments. Caroline knew it was only a matter of time before they lost the house. But the most painful blow once again came from where she least expected it. "You've ruined everything," Emily yelled, slamming the door to her room. She started lashing out at her mother more often, blaming her for their father's departure, her own failures, and the inability to provide a normal life. Caroline tried to talk to her daughter to explain that she was doing everything she could, but each word crashed into a wall of teenage misunderstanding and resentment. One day, Emily didn't come home on time. Caroline searched all the familiar places and called her friends, but with no results. Late that night, the police found her with a group of teenagers on the outskirts of the city. It was the first real distress signal. "If she keeps this up, your daughter will end up in a juvenile detention center," the police officer warned her sternly. Lucas's condition worsened. The constant stress and tension took a toll on his health. He often complained of stomachaches and headaches, growing weaker by the day. Doctors shook their heads. Stress, exhaustion. The child needs peace and stability. But where could Caroline find stability when every day brought a new blow? To pay for her son's treatment, she had to take out another loan. It became the final nail in her financial coffin. The letter from the bank was decisive. "Dear Caroline Thompson, due to prolonged delays in mortgage payments, we are forced to initiate foreclosure proceedings. Your house will be auctioned in 3 weeks." She sat in the kitchen, clutching the letter in her hands, unable even to cry. All she could do was stare at a single spot, feeling the walls of her home slowly closing in around her. And that's when David appeared again. He knocked on the door as if nothing had happened. "We need to talk," he said with his usual confidence. Caroline stood silently at the door, staring at him as though he were a ghost from the past. "So, you've decided to come back and pretend everything will be like it used to be?" Her voice was tired, almost lifeless. David smirked. "No, I came to discuss dividing the property. The house needs to be sold. It's the only way to settle the debts. And maybe the children would be better off in another family. I have connections. I can arrange for them to be transferred to me." The words hit like a hammer. Caroline felt something inside her crack and then shatter into thousands of pieces. He didn't just want to take the house, he wanted to take her children. "You've lost your mind, David," she whispered. "Don't you dare even try." But he looked at her coldly, without the warmth he once had, with the confident cruelty of a man used to getting what he wanted. When her life was on the verge of collapsing completely, Igor appeared. It was unexpected. Caroline hadn't seen him in years, not since they worked together at the same company. He stood at her door with the same warm gaze she remembered so well. "Caroline, I heard what's happening to you. Let me help." She stared at him for a long time, unable to respond. Accepting help felt like admitting defeat. But Igor didn't back down. "I know it's hard for you, but you need to think about the children. We'll fix everything, I promise." His voice was calm and steady. For the first time in a long while, Caroline felt something resembling hope. "Okay," she said quietly, barely holding back tears. It was her first brave decision in a long time, and in that moment, something changed. For Caroline, deciding to accept help was the hardest step. Years of independence and pride didn't allow her to trust anyone again. But now, with her back against the wall, she realized she had no choice. Igor arrived the next day with a warm smile and the sincerity Caroline had almost forgotten existed. He listened to her story without interrupting, and in the end, simply said, "This is temporary, Caroline. We'll get through it. Just don't give up." The first thing Igor suggested was education. "You need to change direction, use your talents. You've always loved cooking, remember?" He looked at her with an encouraging smile. "There are so many entrepreneurship courses available now, I'll help you." At first, Caroline hesitated, but Igor's words were convincing. He paid for her marketing and business development courses and even offered to help with the children so she could focus on studying. Learning was a breath of fresh air for her. She rediscovered her zest for life, opening new horizons. Together with Igor, they started working on a business plan. He suggested the idea of a small bakery where she could sell her cakes and pastries. "Call it Sweet Revolution," he winked. "It's a symbol of your new life." Caroline laughed. It was a light, carefree laugh she hadn't experienced in a long time. "Sweet Revolution? Sounds great." Launching the business was not easy, but Igor was there every step of the way. He helped her find a small location in the city center and invested the initial capital. The first days were tough. Few people walked into the new bakery. Caroline stayed up late at night, baking and creating new recipes, anxiously waiting for her first customers. Then everything changed. One day, a young couple stopped by, tried her pastries, and left a glowing review on social media. Soon, people started gathering at the door. Sweet Revolution quickly became a popular spot. Caroline hired her first employees, women like her who had found themselves in difficult life situations. Together, they worked day and night, turning the bakery into a cozy place where people came not only for desserts, but also for a little piece of warmth. Emily changed too. Seeing her mother fight and succeed, she began to respect her even more. Slowly, she returned to her studies, regained her confidence, and even started helping out at the bakery. Lucas finally recovered. His nightmares disappeared and his smile returned. The boy proudly told everyone that his mum made the best pastries in town. Caroline no longer feared the future. For the first time in a long time, she felt in control of her life. Igor remained by her side. His support grew into something more. Warm friendship gradually turned into tenderness. Caroline wasn't in a hurry, but deep down she knew he had always been the one person she could trust with her heart. One evening, as they were closing the bakery after a long day, Igor turned to her. "Caroline, you know I'm not here just for the business, right?" She smiled. "I know." And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid anymore. She realized that ahead of her was a new life, bright, full of possibilities and true happiness. Sweet Revolution had become a symbol of change. The small, cozy bakery with stained glass windows and the scent of freshly baked pies attracted people from all over the city. Caroline was no longer the woman who once stood on the edge of despair. She had transformed into a confident entrepreneur, her eyes once again shining with life. Every day started with responsibilities, but now they were pleasant ones. New orders, recipe development, and chatting with customers. Caroline not only managed the bakery, but also became an inspiration for many women in the city. Emily had found her path. Her past problems felt like a distant memory. The girl returned to her studies with renewed energy, even winning a city essay contest on the strength of family. Now she dreamed of enrolling in a university to study journalism. She often came to the bakery to help her mother, celebrating every success. "Mom, you're a star in our city now," Emily joked, showing yet another article in the local newspaper about Sweet Revolution. Lucas was once again a cheerful child. His health had fully recovered, and he enjoyed spending time at the bakery, sometimes even helping decorate pastries. "Mom, when I grow up, I'll work here too," he said with enthusiasm. Caroline's business was expanding. She opened a second location in a neighboring town and even started hosting cooking workshops for children. Everything that once seemed impossible was now becoming a reality. Igor remained by her side. Their relationship grew closer every day. He no longer hid his feelings, and Caroline allowed herself to reciprocate. Their bond was filled with trust and warmth, everything she had been missing in the past. One evening, while they were sitting together with a cup of tea in the empty bakery, Igor said, "Caroline, you've changed this city. You've changed your life. I'm proud of you." She squeezed his hand. "It's because of you. You were there when I almost gave up." Meanwhile, David found himself in a very different position. After his breakup with Victoria, his life quickly unraveled. The business he tried to start in New York failed. His ambitions and mistakes led to financial ruin. Stripped of support and money, he was forced to return to his hometown and move in with his parents. Now, he often walked past Sweet Revolution, watching people leave with boxes of pastries and happy smiles. He saw Caroline, happy, confident, surrounded by family and friends, and for the last time, their paths crossed. Caroline was participating in a charity event, handing out pastries to those in need. Among the crowd, she noticed a familiar face. It was David. Gaunt and hunched, he stood aside, watching her. Their eyes met. "Caroline," he whispered. But there was no anger or pain in her eyes, only calm. She walked up to him and handed him a box of pastries. "Good luck, David." He couldn't respond. He just nodded, barely holding back tears, and disappeared into the crowd. That was the moment of truth. Caroline realized that her past no longer had power over her. She had made it. She had survived and won. The next day she returned to the bakery, breathing in the scent of fresh dough, and smiled as she began a new day. Now she knew any crisis could be turned into a new opportunity. Even in the darkest moments, there was light, and it was possible to become the true master of your own destiny.